I am so conservative.
Rationalized in my head. These are things I read in
And
the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had invited...
Remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. Today, Dr. Donald Williams joins us again, this time to discuss the spiritually prepared apologist. I think he is a glutton for punishment, Ron.
I do too.
My name is Don Vino, president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Yes, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow. And now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience, the Bible Buffet. And our regular legal disclaimer, our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that will be Dr. Donald Williams, has no connection whatsoever to any of
None at all.
He's totally distancing himself. Wants you to know, his lawyers to know. He said nothing to do with the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. The satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular announcements notice: the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy the webcast, or if it really annoys you and you'd like to inflict it on somebody else to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And never worry, never fear. This webcast is Y2K compliant, and don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. Welcome, Donald Williams, to this webcast. You obviously have no concern for your own personal reputation, or you wouldn't be here.
Well, if I had a reputation, I could be concerned about it.
Yeah, well, someone has to, and it's not going to be me, I'll tell you that. So Babylon Bee, by the way, they were canceled yesterday by Twitter. What is the name of the Man of the Year?
They punched their ticket. Let's see. Their Man of the Year is Rachel Levine.
Rachel Levine is the Man of the Year.
Yeah, the U.S. Assistant Secretary for Health for the U.S. government. Right?
And that is considered hate speech nowadays, to point out that that he's not actually a female. And so we have this sort of interesting thing in culture where we could sort of rework an old song. Men can do anything better than you women. I can do anything better than
Yeah,
you
yeah, yeah.
as a woman. Right? Yeah. So that's kind of a sad commentary.
Well, yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
There's some things they say you can disagree without being disagreeable. That is what the old adage. But according to some people now, you can't disagree without being seen as
As disagreeable
disagreeable. So you
or
are
labeled.
automatically disagreeable just by the virtue of the fact that you disagree. There are now hateful opinions that are not based on denigrating a person because of who they are, but rather if you denigrate a person's choice, if you take exception to it.
Or their opinions. Right.
Yeah, I don't agree with the opinion that it's okay to kill Jews. I think if you kill Jews, you're probably not a good person. But
Right.
even if I don't say it that way, if I just say I disagree, you should never, ever, ever kill a Jew. If I were in Nazi Germany, they would cancel me. If I express that opinion too strongly.
Right. In Great Britain right now, there's a group trying to force legislation to make it illegal to talk about repentance and forgiveness. It's illegal.
Yeah, I saw that. And then
In a
when you were in the
context, yeah.
when you were in the Soviet Union during communist days, if you expressed anti-government opinions too well at all, maybe you could be sent into a psychiatric facility.
Yes.
Or you could go to a gulag. It depends
A
how you did.
gulag, right.
Yeah, well,
Right.
but sometimes they just sent you to the funny farm, put you in a one sleeve jacket in a rubber room.
So with all of those things going on today, well, not that one necessarily, but although they might, if you are not supportive of the current real estate procurement that Russia is attempting.
Yeah. Let's put a positive spin on that. Yeah.
So
looking for
how
new real
does
estate.
that fit in with our topic of the day? Well, I don't know if it does,
Maybe
but I
not
think we're
that
going
well,
to
but
shoehorn that.
We have a topic.
Shoehorn that right in there. We do have a topic, the spiritually prepared apologist, which doesn't sound like it's at all connected to this, but it actually is.
everything is.
Because there's a passage that many apologists like to go to, but they sort of ignore the bigger context of the passage. What does that look like? Unpack that for us, Dr. Donald Williams.
Yeah, we live in a world that's more hostile to Christian faith and the gospel than it's ever been in our lifetimes. And ironically, 1 Peter 3:15, which is the standard go-to proof text for apologetics, if you look at it in context, really fits this situation in wonderful ways. Now, we always quote this to justify apologetics, so that we're always ready to make a defense, an apologia to anyone asking us for a reason for the hope that is within us. We don't even quote the whole verse, much less look at the context. And I think if we back up and see how this verse actually functions in Peter's message to his audience, we will find that it puts things in a very different light. The subject matter of the larger passage is persecution and suffering. And the topic is, when you are subject to persecution, when you're subject to being mistreated because of your faith, how do you respond to that? I want to start way back up in verse 8, 1 Peter 3:8. To sum up all this whole discussion, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, humble in spirit, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead, for you were called to this very purpose. So here's the situation.
So Dr. Williams, can I ask you, what version are you in? I was going to... Okay, I'll get that going here.
Okay. NASB. If it was good enough for the Apostle Paul, it's good enough for me.
Okay, there you go.
You know, the Bible was translated into Greek so that the people in the first century would be able to read the King James
To understand
Version.
English, yeah.
Right. So, to sum up, we're going to be not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing. So, Peter's audience, the recipients of this epistle are being mistreated because of their faith, and they are turning good for evil. They're returning blessing for curses. And this is very confusing to your enemies when you do this.
Mm-hmm.
Reminds me of the Ferengi rules of acquisition. Every once in a while, declare peace. It confuses the heck out of your enemy.
Man after my own heart, the Ferengi rules of acquisition. Never ask when you can take. I think that's rule 8 or something. I forget.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But one of them is every once in a while declare peace. It confuses the heck out of your opposition, out of your enemies. Well, this is what's happening, and this is very confusing. People don't understand this. So, have you ever wondered why are these people asking these questions? Because when we get to verse 15, we're ready to make a defense to everyone who asks us to give an account for the hope that's within us. Why are people asking questions? It's because Christians don't make any sense to them. Specifically, we're returning blessing for curses. We're returning good for evil. We're returning love for hate. And they're like, what is wrong with you people? Why are you doing this? So as we move on down, pick it up in verse 13. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, and in fact, people shouldn't be harming you if you're doing good, but they are. If you do suffer for the sake of righteousness, then you are blessed. So here's, again, this is all about how to respond in this situation. Do not fear their intimidation. Oh my goodness. You know, when we run into hostility to Christian faith in the gospel, a lot of people's first inclination is just to hush, to be quiet, to just try to get along. And we get intimidated and we stop speaking. Don't do that. And don't be troubled. But, and here is the beginning of our proof text. Instead of returning curses for curses and evil for evil, etc., instead of being intimidated by a hostile religious environment, instead of being troubled, what are we supposed to do? Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Okay? Now, we read 1 Peter 3:15 about as carelessly as we read the Great Commission, in which the imperative verb is not go. You know, we always quote it, go ye into all the world and make disciples. The imperative verb is not go. It's as you're going into the world, the command is make disciples. That's where Jesus' emphasis falls. Unfortunately, not where ours does. We do the same thing with 1 Peter 3:15. The imperative verb is sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. So instead of responding to meanness with meanness of our own, instead of being intimidated by it, instead of being troubled by it, we're supposed to sanctify Christ as Lord in our hearts. Now, there's a couple of key technical terms here that we need to unpack. First, sanctify. I mean, you can't, how do you sanctify Jesus? He's already holy. You can't make him any holier. But the basic root meaning of sanctify is to set apart. So we set Jesus apart. We give him a special place that nobody else has. And that place is Lord of our hearts. And here's another place where we tend to misunderstand the scriptures, because in modern American English, the heart is the seat of the emotions. When we talk about heart, we're talking about feelings. But in biblical culture, the heart didn't symbolize the emotions. If a biblical writer wanted to talk about emotion, he would use the bowels. In fact, the King James actually translates that literally in one passage, talking about bowels of compassion, which would make no sense to a modern speaker of English at all. In biblical language, the heart is not the seat of the emotions. That would be the bowels. In biblical culture, the heart is the central core of your personality, that place where your intellect, your emotions, and your will find their unity. The place where intellect, emotion, and will come together, that central core of your being that makes you you, out of which your thoughts, your feelings, and your decisions flow. Jesus is to be set apart, sanctified as Lord of that. In other words, the command here is to get yourself in such a place where Jesus is sitting on the throne of your heart, the throne of your whole personality, and he has no competition for that spot. Jesus is Lord of your life, period. That is how, unless you're in that spot, you're not going to be able to respond appropriately to all this hostility that's out there. And the way biblical writers in the New Testament frequently organize their material is they'll have an imperative verb or a main verb, and then there are participles. Participles are in English are ing verbs. So you have the main verb, and then you have a list of, that's the main point. Then you have the participles or the subpoints under it. Okay. So the main point of apologetics is not be ready to make a defense. In other words, apologetics isn't supposed to be a cry for nerds of the world unite, and and here's a chance to be a smart aleck and to destroy opponents with argument and feel spiritual about it. It doesn't start there. It starts with set Christ apart as Lord of your heart. That's how you're able to return blessing for curses. And in that context, that's how you're going to be able also then to, in a spiritual manner, in a manner pleasing to the Lord, and in a manner effective in evangelism, you're going to be able to do the other things. Sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to anyone who asks you an account for the hope that is within you, yet with gentleness and reverence, and keep a good conscience, so that the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior of Christ will be put to shame. So it goes right back. The context is persecution. Then we get the apologetics proof text, and it goes immediately right back to persecution. So this is not in any way lessening the emphasis on rational apologetics. It's not in any way lessening the emphasis on rational argument. It's rooting those rational arguments in the realities of life, because this is, people might ask us to justify our faith in lots of contexts and in lots of ways, and we would welcome that whenever, and we should be ready whenever it comes. But what's in focus here is not an abstract intellectual discussion.
Right. Right. Let me walk it back here a second, if I might, because everything what it sounds to me like what you're saying is it starts with where our heart is with Christ, sanctifying Him. Everything else then flows from that, not the other way around. And I say that for this reason. Ron and I just spent a weekend with XJWs and ex-Mormons. And one of the common stories when we talk with folks in these groups is, yes, we met with Christians, or we've talked with Christians that are trying to reach someone in our former groups, and they start out with, yes, I opened the door, that Jehovah's Witness was there, I gave him the gospel, I told him Watchtower was a false prophet, and I slammed the door in his face. As though that is somehow helpful in getting the gospel out there. Now, it's
Right.
good that they gave him the gospel, but are they doing that as a, here's the information you need, now go away? And does that reflect Christ being sanctified in your heart? Or
Right.
say someone who's been in the New Age, and I have someone, there's actually several particular in mind. One I'm trying to find a church for in another state, and the church isn't calling me back, which is really kind of frustrating. Uh, so here they've come to the faith, and they will talk to the people, will give them answers, but it doesn't seem like they care about them. So when we talk about sanctifying Christ in your heart, is there a sense of caring about the unbeliever as part of that?
I would think so. Yeah. This is, I mean, I titled this The Spiritual Preparation of the Apologist, because the apologist needs to start not with the arguments, but with Christ sanctified as Lord of his heart, so that you can respond appropriately to persecution, which is the immediate context,
Right.
but also because apologetics is a necessary but a very dangerous part of Christian discipleship.
Why? Why dangerous?
Apologetics appeals to people who enjoy arguments. I mean, I very much in my flesh like winning. I think that there's very little that can be more fun than running an atheist through with the rapier of my wit, carving his heart out, holding it up in my hands while I do a victory dance over his supine carcass lying on the ground. And apologetics attracts people like me who think that that would be a really cool thing to do. And so you do that, and you enjoy the applause of the people who are already converted, who are looking on, and you haven't really achieved the goal of evangelism or apologetics in any way, shape, or form at all.
Right.
And so where it starts is sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart, so that you can love people who are hating you. And then now you're ready to answer the inevitable question that's going to come. And, you know, it would be nice if people walked up to us on the street and asked us, I can just tell you're a Christian because I can see the halo around your head. So could you please explain to me why you believe in the resurrection of Jesus? That typically doesn't happen. In the context of 1 Peter 3:15, people are asking questions because they want to know what's wrong with us. When they curse us, why don't we curse back?
Yeah.
And when they curse us, not only we don't curse back, we respond with a blessing. And they're going to want to know, why would you do that? And we better have a good reason. I mean, because we're doing something that makes no sense to them. So we need a good reason why we do that. And the reason is, of course, it all comes back to Christ, who was merciful to us when we were mired in our sins, and consequently, we are forgiving and merciful to others.
Yeah.
And Christ isn't just a myth that we bought into that makes us act this weird way. It's actually rooted in history, in reality, in the crucifixion, in the resurrection, etc., which, as the apostles constantly did, we can defend, and we can give you an answer that's far more than you ever knew you wanted, and yet it's all relevant. And we can do it in a way that you can listen without being afraid that we're going to make a public example of you as a idiot and a heretic.
Well, this is more than just people cursing us. I mean, with words in 1 Peter 3, they're trying to do harm to us for righteousness' sake.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes it even more inexplicable why you would I would respond with a blessing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're living radical lives. We're not just living the same way as everybody else, only a little less obviously immoral and a little bit more honest. And on Sunday, we actually go to church instead of sleeping in. No, we're living lives that are radically different from what the world expects of us. And that's what sets up these questions. That's why it starts with your response to persecution is to sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Maybe if we gave people the opportunity to see that, we would get more of those questions. And maybe then we would be in a better position to answer them.
I like to tell two stories that might be helpful because, I have the tendency of saying, when we deal with something like this, I want to give someone a piece of luggage that they can pack this away in and give them a handle to carry it out of the room with so that it's useful. I have two that I think can be helpful. One is an individual, he's going to be with the Lord now, but his name is Harry. Harry had been a Jehovah's Witness, and he came out of the watchtower, he became a believer. And Harry was he was an interesting character in a number of ways. He was a little bit physically handicapped. He struck people as a sort of an odd duck, and he might have been, but he loved the Lord, and he went every year to Mardi Gras. He did it because he had made acquaintances with a pastor at a church right down in the French Quarter. And every year he would run into a group of gay guys that sort of would make fun of him. They'd torment him, but he became friends with one of them in a way. At some point in this whole relationship, the guy that he had been talking to about the Lord was beat up by several of the others who were gay. And so Harry took this guy, took him back to his hotel room. He had 2 beds. He put him up. He took care of him. When the guy came to, he had been drunk. When the guy came to, he was shocked. And he asked Harry, why are you doing these things? I mean, we have been brutal to you. And so he got an opportunity to share the gospel with him. The guy became a believer because of how Harry treated him. Harry was never shy about the sin they were involved with. And yet he cared for them and exemplified that in spite of their persecution. Another is an atheist. She too was gay, and we had met her. She was part of the Jesus Seminar. She was a pastor of a very liberal church. And through a series of events, she ended up coming in touch with some of our Midwest Christian Outreach folks. And we started talking with her. She was surprised that although we held very firmly that her lifestyle was sinful, we stayed focused on what does the Word of God teach and how does it impact us today. She came to the realization that the Jesus Seminar, the John Dominic Crossan, who was head of that, who she knew, was functionally an atheist. That shocked her. And we got that from her book. Why? Because I sat down with her every Wednesday, and it was kind of our Wednesdays with John Dominic Crossan. She got to choose the book, and she got to buy the book. And we would go through that, and she came to the realization he was functionally an atheist. She came to the faith. Why? Because we spent time answering her questions rather than ridiculing her lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
We never softened on sexuality, but it didn't have to be in play every moment that we were together. There's other issues to consider. Now, would you say that fits at all with the context of what you're talking about?
It sounds like people who are actually putting it into practice. Absolutely. Now, we have to be ready to make a defense in any circumstance, whether it be in an academic setting or just chatting with our neighbors. And it's not that apologetics is limited to persecution, but the fact that when Peter gives us this commandment to be ready to do apologetics, the fact that it occurs in that setting, in that context, tells us something, I think, about our approach and what our approach needs to be. And it tells me that I can't just study the arguments and I can't just memorize the evidence. I have to spiritually be in the right kind of place in order to be able to use any of that. And that starts with sanctifying Christ as Lord in my heart, because I don't respond to mistreatment with love.
Right.
That's not me. Only insofar as Christ is living through me do I actually do that. And so I think many apologists and many believers practice apologetics in this way wonderfully, like the two people you mentioned. But I think that the apologetics industrial complex would have more impact on both the church and the world if it put more emphasis on the big picture here. Like I said earlier, it bears repeating because people always like to run with something to one extreme or another. Yeah. This does not in any way lessen the emphasis on rational argument. It simply roots those arguments in the realities of life,
right,
so that they have a chance to become meaningful to people. And so that we have a chance. The only way I overcome my natural tendency to want to win arguments, even if I lose people in the process, the only way I overcome that is to the extent that Christ really does become the Lord of my heart.
Okay. Now, we got to do two quick things. One is I'm going to show you a question that we will follow up with. It's a little bit off topic, maybe, but I think it'll fit. And the other is that we have to hear a word from our sponsor. Here's our question to think about while we're hearing from the sponsor.
Yeah, we have some questions here. Are you tired of hearing all about the difference between the milk of the word and the meat of the word? Are you wondering when your church is going to get around to serving the ice cream and cheesecake of the word? Does your pastor take the whole Bible thing way too seriously? Well, then you need to check out the Bible Buffet. It's not your father's worship experience. Everything at the Bible Buffet is prepared with your comfort and enjoyment in view. Everything there is gluten-free, trans-fat-free, and truth claim-free. And all of their dishes are piping hot and ready to eat, even during COVID, where you can take advantage of the Bible Buffet carryout. This week's regular Sunday specials include Aryan appetizers, Sibelian succotash, Galatian goulash, Gnostic nut salad, Pelagian pie, and Socinian salad. And don't forget, the Bible Buffet is an accredited ministry of the Church of Smorgasbordianism. The Bible Buffet, it's not your father's worship experience, but it should be yours. So, kind of just what's the appetite there, doesn't it?
It really does. Now we're going to for our range of viewers, this is going to seem a little off topic, but I think it's an important one. And I'm really glad she asked. She's a 22-year-old Christian woman. She tells us she's going on a blind date, and we three gentlemen. Gentlemen, I don't know if that really fits in.
A nice older gentleman too.
I am old. I fit that part. What do I look for in a partner? Boy, does anyone want to jump right in, or should I just go ahead?
Well, first of all, is he a Christian? I'm assuming Flags for Life is a Christian young lady. Oh, there we go. I'm a good Christian.
A good Christian woman, right?
Of 22. Okay, 22-year-old Christian woman. You want to find a believer. You want not just someone who says that he's a believer, but what church is he going to? Is it a good Bible teaching church? And you want to at 22. Most people are pretty serious about looking for a mate. You're going to want to really get to know them. I would say it should only take a couple, 3 months to kind of get to know a feel for whether this person is a good prospect.
Right. It's a pretty long blind date, Ron.
Well, I'm thinking this is
Yeah, it could be a long blind
This
date.
kind of comes after the sort.
Well-
Well, it doesn't have to, but
Oh, I have to tell you another story. I love stories. I have a lot of stories, and being old helps to do that. As a part of a house church some years ago, and I had a young woman, probably about the same age group, come to me and say that she had been to a number of different dating and marriage seminars as she was looking for the man of her dreams, and she had a 4-page typewritten, this is what he's going to have as his personality, his faith walk, and all those sorts of things. And what did I think of that? And I looked at her and I said, well, I think you're going to probably be an old maid. And she said, what do you mean? I said, this guy doesn't exist. He's never existed, actually, and probably will never exist. And she said, what should I do? I said, okay, this is somewhat simple. Make a different list. It will include the things that you cannot stand in a person, and don't marry him.
it's just the things that really are your hot buttons.
Right. Because in any relationship, you're going to grate against one another. I'm married 51 years now. Joy dated me for 3 years before that. She still likes me. Part of it is that in a relationship, flags for life, you're going to ebb and flow. You're going to have to place the other as more important than yourselves. That's the biblical statement on that. A husband says, love your wives as Christ loved the church. That is self-sacrificially. Oh, there's a context there, isn't there? We're back to context again. So you're not the ruler of your wife. You are the servant of your wife. Wives, love your husbands. Now, there's a relational statement going on there. And I suspect that is because women tend to be more relational women tend to be more relational than men. So men have to be instructed how to have a relationship, serve your wife. Women have to be reminded to love their husbands, because I got to tell you, guys are really irritating. We are totally
Oh
irritating.
yeah, I know. That's my wife. She'll tell you. But I would also tell Flags for Life that you want to find a serious Christian man that is serious about his faith.
Right.
And you usually don't find that kind if he's going to a different church every Sunday. Now, if he's doing that right now, there might be a reason. Maybe he just moved into an area and he's trying out churches. But that's not a spiritually sustainable kind of behavior.
Correct.
You and he both need to have a church you're faithful to, and you're faithful to it because it is a church where the word is taught well, they pray together, they love each other, and you're growing in your faith there.
Right.
So
that's all really good advice. One additional thing that I've noticed that tends to show up in the most successful long-term relationships is that they are two people who not only love each other, but together love something else.
mm-hmm.
So that they're not just standing face to face, looking into each other's eyes. They can also stand side by side, and work as a team to pursue other things that they love in common. So the thing I would be looking for if I were on the market right now is if I have this reaction, oh my goodness, this is a person who loves the right things for the right reasons. And those things would include the Lord, first of all, the church, the gospel, and some other things that are particularly personal to you, so that the relationship isn't just about the two of you,
Right.
but it's the two of you in common pursuit, helping each other to do something else.
Right.
I ask myself, does this person love the right things for the right reason? And oh my goodness, one of them's me.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good situation.
So would you say sanctifying Christ as Lord in your heart fits in this category as well?
Absolutely. It's the foundation for everything in the Christian life.
Right.
You want somebody as a life partner who is pursuing that seriously with you and who's not at a radically different place in that pursuit. In other words, it's especially bad if the lady is more spiritually mature than the guy. The guy probably needs it more than she does, but he's supposed to be the spiritual leader in the home. You want somebody that can function in that role. So does this person love the right things for the right reasons? And will I serve God better in partnership with this person or by myself? It doesn't matter, how much in love I am,
Right?
because that will not satisfy long term. It's so intense right now. It feels like it will, but you got to have something else that you have in common, and the most important thing is Christ and serving Him.
Right.
Will I be a better servant of Christ doing it with this person or not? And if the answer isn't very, very much yes, then back off and look in a different direction.
Well, very often when we say, I love you, what it really means is I love me. I love how you reflect me, how you make me feel on my arm, how other people look at me when you and I walk down the street together. It is really about how much I love me, not necessarily how much I love you. Yeah, sort of is in there somewhere, but it has to do with what it does for me. When Christ is the center of the relationship, then loving you because of Christ is a little different. Now, someone asked, George Burns was not a Christian to my knowledge, but Johnny Carson asked him one day, and Johnny Carson had been divorced at this point 5 times. George Burns and Gracie Allen had been married forever, it seems like. How did you stay married? And George Burns said, well, we don't expect as much of each other as you people do today.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, very profound. Joy and I have carried those with us through our entire marriage because he's right. We can only live up to certain expectations. We can't fulfill every need of the other person. Christ can do that. So if Christ is the center, when Joy does something that irritates me, I have to go, I love her in spite of that. And I'm glad because Christ loves me in spite of who I am. And so it puts a different spin on it. Christ is the center and focus. So she's from the UK, both Methodist, and does that kind of match. So we'll have similar values. The answer to that is when you're doing in marriage counseling, you're going to need to talk about what church you're going to go to together. It may not be Methodist, but you should have as a center of your relationship Christ and work it out in the church. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Thank you.
Back to Don.
Yeah. So that is it. If you're like me, it's hard to get to shift gears and go back to what we were talking about. That's me.
Well, I've tried to keep though that because I really think the aspect of Christ is sanctify Christ in your heart. Yes, it's important in the discussion on apologetics, but it's important in the discussion on relationships. How do I find someone that I'm going to date and potentially marry? How should apologetics be approached amongst fellow believers and sisters in Christ is the question, Krista. That find it too divisive. We can represent well in humility, but will still experience disdain. Maybe is too strong a word. I don't know. I think disdain is probably.
Oh yeah, no, we get a lot of that. You'll get a lot of that if you're a Christian. Yeah.
I disdain Ron a lot. So.
Yeah, and it's kind of mutual, but
Yeah, there is a resistance to apologetics among conservative American Christians, which is simply unbiblical.
Yeah.
Because if you're telling me that apologetics is unspiritual and we shouldn't be doing it, you're telling me to disobey Scripture.
Yep.
And if people are unrepentantly unbiblical, then division is not necessarily a bad thing. So do it in love sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts. Do it in the spirit that is indicated by the discussion we've had about the context of 1 Peter 3:15, so that there's no excuse for other people creating division by rebelling against Scripture, by saying, no, we don't need to obey 1 Peter 3:15. We're more spiritual than Jesus. We're more spiritual than the apostles. We don't have to. That's what they're actually saying. And if they insist on saying that after you have shown them a better way, then there's nothing left for you to do but stick with the truth and let them go their way. But we make every effort to win them over first.
What if it is your church leadership that seems to be wary, let's say, of apologetics, and then discovers along your conversations with them that there are certain teachers that they seem to be enamored with, and now are offended to hear that you are not equally as enamored? Let's say Beth Moore. I mean, she's pretty popular in a lot of churches. Someone might ask me my views on Beth Moore, and then they are less than happy at my response. Why don't I love Beth Moore to the same degree they do? And I start rattling it off. Now I'm mean-spirited and narrow-minded because I say, contemplative prayer is an Eastern metaphysical practice. It doesn't really belong in the church. And their response is, but it makes me feel spiritual. And I learned from Beth Moore on the Be Still DVD that it's a really wonderful thing. And I go, but the Be Still DVD is Eastern metaphysical teaching. Why would you bring that in the church? How do you deal with church leadership that's like that? Do you stay at a church like that even? I mean, I would want to, because I think the church is possibly teachable, but maybe they're not.
Well, you have to find out if they're teachable. And ultimately, one of the things I'm looking for in church leadership is discernment. And if it's not there, then obviously I need to be following different leaders.
And the sad thing is, you can go into a lot of churches where there will be a pastor who can make a good presentation. He can make a good presentation of the gospel. He can make a good presentation of many passages in God's word. But that same pastor will often allow things into his church that just shouldn't be there. Mm-hmm. And so you come in and it might even be refreshing just how good of an expositor he is and how good of a preacher he is. And then you might find out a couple of months later, they're doing something with the Enneagram this weekend, or something like that.
To get back to the question, there are a couple of reasons why American Christians are hostile to apologetics and wary of it. One is the anti-intellectualism of the American church, which is just a heresy. I mean, Jesus says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, right, and strength. And so anti-intellectualism is heretical. It tells us to disobey Jesus. But there's a better reason why people are wary of apologetics, and that is that they've encountered the bad kind, the wrong kind, the kind that are in it to win arguments rather than to win people to Christ. Or they think they're in it to win people to Christ, but the way they're doing it is serving the other goal, really, and not that. So the importance of understanding what we've been talking about today is that we need to start there because it helps us provide a different model so that they have the chance to see what apologetics can be and have a chance to get past their prejudices against it so that they can realize the tremendous benefits that it brings to us, not only in terms of our ability to do evangelism, but also in building up our own faith and in understanding every aspect of Christian doctrine has been attacked and needs to be defended.
Yeah.
and sometimes those attacks come from within the church. So the right kind of apologetic mindset, which flows from that heart where Jesus is set apart as Lord, that is tremendously important, not only in presenting the gospel to non-Christians, but in presenting apologetics to Christians who may have been turned off by people who haven't paid enough attention to that aspect of things.
Well, you mentioned two reasons for opposition to apologetics, unless I missed some. One I will just call bad experiences. It's short for bad experiences with apologists usually.
Right.
But the other one is anti-intellectualism. I've scratched out three others. I think they were maybe implied. One of them, at least, was implied by something either you or Don said. That is, it's like a camouflage for poor doctrine. In other words, well, of course you don't want a lot of apologetics here because you're protecting, your Beth Moore seminars and DVDs or something. So I would call that a camouflage for poor doctrine. But I have two others, and one of them is just plain old conflict avoidance. They maybe they've dabbled in it, maybe they've seen it done, and even though it wasn't done poorly, they just don't like the conflict. They just don't like the can't we do this some other way that doesn't involve people getting upset with each other, potentially at least? And then the other is intimidation in the sense of, it seems like you have to master a whole lot of information to be a good apologist.
Right.
And boy, I don't know if I can do that. So my own low aptitude and my pride, I mean, maybe it's just not my gift. Can I just say that instead of being anti-apologetics? But some people will.
Only problem with that is that apologetics is part of Christian discipleship.
Right. It's something everybody's going to have to do.
Is not addressed to intellectuals. It's not addressed to nerds.
Right.
It's addressed to believers, period.
But I may not be the kind who's going to spearhead or even join an apologetics ministry. But at some point, I need those guys and girls to tell me the things that you're saying here today, to be ready to give an answer, because everybody's going to have to do it.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake to think that doing apologetics means we all have to channel Bill Craig.
No,
what you have to do when I teach apologetics, which I did for many years at Toccoa Falls College, I stress, guys, you can't just repeat what you've heard from me. You can't just repeat what you've heard from Francis Schaeffer. You can't just repeat what you've heard from C.S. Lewis. You have to digest this stuff so that it becomes part of you, and so that it comes out of your mouth in your voice, which means not everybody is going to be equipped to handle every potential argument and every potential challenge. But on your level, where you are, with the kind of people that you deal with, you need to be learning to give a response.
I had years ago. I had a Bible verse. Years ago, I had a Bible study that was supposed to go for 6 weeks. It ended up being 6 years. It was kind of fun. We did a lot of different apologetic types of things. It was a group that we would actually bring in Seventh-day Baptist and then kind of debate their doctrine on those issues. The overriding thing was that we needed to care about the individual more than we cared about the argument, but that was important. We had a lady there, really loved her. She didn't totally understand everything we were doing, but it gave her enough information to prevent her from wandering off into false teaching. That was an important thing. And second is when someone would ask her a question that she couldn't answer, she didn't get flustered so much. She would say, I don't know, but I know someone who does. Would you talk to them? So not everybody is going to be gifted in this area. And frankly, I have to tell you, some apologists I've met are not gifted as apologists. They're gifted at arguing. They're not gifted at caring for somebody else because Christ is not being sanctified. He's not the center of why they're doing what they're doing. It's some other thing that's a problem.
Yeah.
So everybody is going to be called upon at some point to give the answer, to give the account, to give the reason for the hope that is within them. And we're to do it with a humble attitude, with meekness and fear. And that's, I think, is another part of the verse that many people who feel drawn to apologetics, and maybe they really are called. Maybe this really is a God-given burden.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when God brings us into areas that he wants to use us, he first has to knock off a lot of rough edges on us. And there might be so many rough edges to be knocked off that it might discourage us.
Mm-hmm.
It's humbling. It's humbling to go in thinking you're loaded for bear. I've got all these answers, and then why is it that 15 straight consecutive Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons or whatever are totally unfazed by everything I said? Oh, you mean it might be my attitude?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I mean, I hear all these testimonies about how other people bring people to the Lord with these same arguments, and I don't think I'm quite trying to parrot them mindlessly. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's something I'm doing.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Only the Holy Spirit can bring someone to Christ.
Right.
And he uses us
Right.
out of his grace because
That's another thing.
God loves us. He lets us help. But we have to be completely dependent on him. Behind Don Vino, I see the cover of my book, 95 Theses for a New Reformation. And as we get to the end of the hour, let me make sure I say that if you're interested in this topic and you want more where this came from, get a hold of that book. And there's a chapter on apologetics, how the church needs to be reformed in its approach to apologetics, which gives more detail on some of these points and has references, etc. 95 Theses for a New Reformation, Semper Reformanda Publications. You can look for me
in the description box at the bottom here.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can look for me on Amazon and find it. And it looks like that black rectangle behind Don Vino.
Yeah, exactly. So, Church Quake Ministries. I like that. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Church Quake Ministries. I am hoping to find a way to convince my pastor to make apologetics a part of all of our church education pursuits. I know my pastor does that at our home church. We have something he calls Wonder Lake Bible Church, which is a 6-year process of going through defense of the faith, how to know the Bible is reliable, pretty much all of the basic stuff that you're going to need. One of the things I need to say, and someone else is here with us today has a similar problem, some pastors are just afraid of apologetics, mostly because of bad apologists. I do have to say, apologists have not, because we will argue at the drop of a hat, and we'll drop the hat gladly.
I don't think you're right about that, Don. I really got to take exception to that.
And you didn't even have to take your hat off for that one. I have had to spend sometimes a year or more with the pastor, talking with them, having lunch with them, whatever, building relationship where I'm serving in some capacity before they would even really acknowledge that what we're doing has validity. So it's not that they're opposed to apologetics per se, but they're opposed to the apologists they have met. That's a problem, and that can only come by building a relationship. Then you have what we were talking about earlier, those whose favorite teachers are maybe being called into question. And it is true that as we deal with defense of the faith outside the church, we also have to deal with it inside the church. Our philosophy at Midwest Christian Outreach is, if we don't have the integrity to address false teaching in the church, we don't have the right to address false teaching outside the church. So that's going to make some people unhappy when we address Andy Stanley, for example, and he says we need to unhitch from the Old Testament. That's a problem, and it needs to be addressed publicly.
And unfortunately, doing apologetics inside the church doesn't exempt you from doing it in the context of persecution.
Right.
You can often be attacked by your fellow believers worse than you are by people on the outside. Because
Absolutely.
Satan knows that if he can get us fighting against each other, he's neutralized us.
Right.
Yeah, to a tremendous extent, he has.
Right. All right. So you could get Dr. Williams' book, 95 Thesis. He's been on our program a few other times. You can go back and look up Donald Williams and watch what we've done in the past. We really enjoy him a lot.
Yeah, and I like being on this show because it lets me pretend like I'm the serious theologian.
You're not just a pretender.
Well, we do like satire, so we have a satire of a serious theologian there.
Yeah.
I mean,
all right.
The idea that you would allow irony or sarcasm to intrude on any of these statements, I just find that really hard to believe. I mean, it's just,
I know. It is difficult.
I mean, I never use sarcasm or irony myself.
Hardly ever. I did notice that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We weren't even sure if you had a sense of humor, actually. So.
Right.
All right, Don. Ron, would you care
I don't
to?
think we would be friends if I didn't.
I agree.
All
Walk us
right.
out of here, Ron.
Let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Joe Lake Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murphy Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law. Never gonna happen. So, with
Never, ever.
we bid you adieu.
I love it. Now we have to do the royal wave, and then we're going to go end.
Hey, we could